Tom Mulcair joins me now. He's CTV's political commentator and the former leader of the NDP. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, Marcia.
We don't have enough time for this conversation, but...
July is usually so quiet on the political.
So you've had 24 hours. We've all had some time to digest this. Where do you stand right now on Patrick Brown versus Lee Hawk versus Pierre Poilievre? Where are we in this?
Well, I would add to that mix the reference you just made to high-powered lawyers. Marie-Henin entering this race on the side of Patrick Brown could shake things up quite a bit. I suspect one of the first cases she'll be reading is the case that involved the NDP in the race to replace me as NDP leader, because the courts in Ontario looked at a case involving a person who thought he was a valid candidate. The party had said no. Now, the judge sided with the NDP on that decision, but added this. This institution, the leadership race, in our system of government is crucial, and no, parties will not be able to tell the courts that they can't get involved. Now, the Conservatives will be pleading that everybody signed on, that there'd be no judicial review. But if you lose jurisdiction, if you don't respect the two most basic rules of natural justice, that nobody can be a judge in their own case and that you have to hear both sides, then the courts will get involved. So don't think that this thing is over. I wasn't personally very impressed by Brown's answers yesterday. They seemed more like non-denial denials, saying, oh, it's the party's fault they haven't been clear. The party hasn't been transparent. They say, it's in the hands of Elections Canada now, don't ask us any more questions. Well, that's not the way this works. It is fundamental in our democracy. And it was just said in the Boris Johnson interview that you were doing before. It's a system that is not the same as the Americans. You don't vote directly for prime minister. It's the party that gets the most seats that sees its leader become prime minister. So that's why these races are so important, Marcia, and that's why the courts eventually will be taking a look at this at the same time, of course, as Elections Canada.
What do you make of Brown's claim of political corruption?
Well, that's a loaded word that means a lot and nothing at the same time. What is the corruption? He's basically having a finger pointed at him by the party saying, well, there was corruption alleged in your campaign because people were being paid by numbered companies and they weren't real volunteers. They were actually being paid. So, it's the pot calling the kettle black at this stage of the game. What we have to know is that there are rules in place federally. That's why Elections Canada is involved. It's important. There are rules within the Conservative Party. Those are the ones that they're going to be putting forward. Brown knows all that stuff. This guy's a cat with 9 lives politically. You remember how he was thrown out as leader of the Conservatives in Ontario? Now we see that even his councillors in his city of Brampton are saying, hey, enough is enough. He's faced allegations that turned out to be true about sketchy financing, the political financing in the past, but he's always managed to bounce back. I think that the unsinkable Patrick Brown might have finally met his comeuppance in this one. It's going to be very hard, even with an incredibly skilled lawyer like Marie-Henin, to see what his path is, because even if he were reinstated, there'd be that big cloud over his head.
Brown says that they signed up 150,000 members. Where do those supporters go now, Tom?
I think that the biggest worry for the Jean Charest camp is that they won't vote. See, Mr. Charest put out a paper a couple of days ago with his camp that described his path to victory. He said, look, it's about 338 ridings. It's not about the total number of votes. And if Poilievre wins one riding by 7,000 votes, that's still only 100 points. If Charest wins a riding on the lower North Shore of Quebec with 150 Conservative members, that's still 100 points. So that was his essential argument. And he was, of course, insisting on the fact that almost all of Patrick Brown's votes, because they're very similar, Brown is a big fan of Jean Charest, those votes would come on a second ballot or a second choice to Charest. That's starting to evaporate for Charest. So this decision, going back to its importance, essentially is a decision by people within the Conservative Party about who's going to be the winner. Because we've said that Poilievre was the prohibitive front runner, but now it looks like he's going to win, because if you remove Brown from the equation, there's no plausible path to victory for Charest or anybody else of the more progressive stripe. Added to that, even though he's a very decent fellow, Ian Brodie, the person who put out the tweet announcing this late Tuesday night, is, of course, a former chief of staff to Stephen Harper. People like Jenny Brown, senior advisor to Harper, well, in charge of Harper's campaign and senior advisor to Poilievre. This is interesting because, of course, Harper's made no secret of the fact that he's not a fan of the Jean Charest style of conservatism, this progressive conservatism. So the shadow of Stephen Harper now is floating above all of these events. And this is why the courts eventually are going to be the ones to have to try to clarify some part of this, because I don't think Brown is a victim here, but it could very well be that they could prove, at least on a balance of probabilities, that he has been treated unfairly, and that might, again, allow him back into the race. Will it change anything? Not convinced, Marcia.
All right, Tom, there's certainly more to come on this one. Tom Mulcair for us this morning. Thanks so much.